What's going on, everybody? It's Charles. In this video, I'm going to show you step by step on how to remove and install a fuel injector on the Gen 3 EA888 engines. Now, for this demonstration, we're using my Golf R. However, you can follow the same exact procedure on all of the Gen 3 EA888s. That's going to include the 1.8 turbos. That's going to include the other 2-liter turbos that are like in the GTI, the Audi A4, the Audi S3, the Audi A3, I think the Q5, and a whole bunch of other ones. This is the most common engine right now in the VW family. So odds are you can use this for Volkswagen, Audi, Skoda, Seat, and maybe even other engines around the world. The first thing we need to do is we're gonna have to remove our intake manifold. This is a pretty easy procedure. There's maybe 15 bolts that need to come out. If you hustle, you can probably get the intake manifold off in less than an hour. If you wanna see step by step where all the bolts are and exactly how to remove and then reinstall this intake manifold, I did a complete walkthrough on it. I'll be sure to link that video up for you guys. And really, taking the intake manifold off is the biggest part of this entire job. The tools you're gonna need for this job are going to be pretty straightforward. You'll need all the tools to remove the intake manifold, which really just includes a T30, a number 10 triple square, some basic hand tools, a 21mm open-end wrench, a 17mm open-end wrench, a ratchet, an extension. I like a couple of different 90-degree picks depending on your method of working, and of course some shop towels and rags. The only extra thing you're really going to need for the injectors that you didn't need for the manifold is going to be the tool to reseal the injectors. You might get lucky and all the injectors stay in the cylinder head and you only have to remove the one you need to replace. However, odds are more than one injector is going to come out of the cylinder head, and if it comes out, you really should reseal it. There are a few options for resealing the injectors. I will link to the tool. It's not terribly expensive, and you can reseal the injectors yourself. I did a video walking you step by step on how to do that. I'll also link that video as well. You can also take those injectors to a local VW Audi shop, either the dealership or an independent shop, and have them reseal the injectors there. You're probably gonna spend about the same as the tool costs, so for me, it sounds like a good excuse to buy a new tool. Then you could be the hero that rents out or loans out the tool. Next, we are going to loosen our high-pressure fuel rail. What we're gonna do, we're gonna take a rag, we're gonna set it underneath the high-pressure fuel pump. The way I like to do this is with 2 wrenches, a 21mm to hold the top connection that's actually connected to the high-pressure fuel pump, a 17mm box wrench to actually loosen the connection. You are going to get a little bit of fuel spraying out, so just be extra careful here. And once it's loose, you can set your counter hold wrench, the 21mm, to the side, and just go ahead and finish loosening it. Now that our intake manifold is all out of the way, let's go ahead and get our fuel rail out so we can gain access to our fuel injectors. We need to disconnect our fuel rail pressure sensor, get that out of the way. Next, we take our 2 bolts out, set our bolts to the side. Put a little glove on the end of our fuel rail here. You're probably going to get some fuel spillage, so we want to try and capture as much of that as we can. Now we just rock our fuel rail off, a little on one side, a little on the other, and the other side. Now we got to take our wire bracket off of here. Now there is going to be fuel in this, so you don't want to just turn it over and dump all that fuel out. Let's get this and set this on the bench. Now we actually did good here. All of our injectors stayed in the cylinder head, which is pretty awesome, except we actually need to get them out. Next, let's get our fuel injectors disconnected. These connectors also have the little lock on them that you have to slide. So these have the lock you push to the back, and then the part you push to release the connector is the black part inside the little red part. Now we can get that whole wire bridge out of the way. Next, let's go ahead and get our injectors out. Now, you're gonna be shocked to learn that there's a special tool to remove these injectors. What the special tool does is it grabs the injector, and it's basically a tiny slide hammer. A few whacks and the injector comes right out. If you don't have that special tool though, don't worry. Go ahead and take the metal ring off first. Then there's a couple ways you can do that. All these ways work okay. You just wanna be extra careful. Now, if you're replacing the injector, don't worry about it. Just grab some pliers, twist, and pull. Just make sure you don't break the injector off in the cylinder head. What I'm going to show you today is we're going to use a bent pick. We are going to go right behind the injector near where the connector is, and we're just going to rock the injector out. Now, you need to be careful here. Take your time. One, you're going up, you're prying kind of back against aluminum, so we don't want to pry too hard. We also don't want to break our injectors. So gently rock your pick back and forth. You could also use a screwdriver here if you wanted to. I just kind of like the angle of this one here. Once it's loose enough, gently pull the injector out, and we can see just how much carbon buildup is on the tip of this injector. That's significant for 10,000 miles. Let's go ahead and get the other ones out and see what they all look like. Now here are our fuel injectors. I went ahead and resealed all 4 of them. I reinstalled one just as a test fit. Something to note on these injectors, this lower seal is actually quite a bit looser than it is on the CCTAs. Now there could be a couple of reasons for this. The kit that I was using is actually the one from the dealership, so it may have just been a little bit worn out. Yours may be a little bit tighter than this, but these are a tiny bit looser than the older CCTA ones. Either way, they dropped in just fine. Let's go ahead and get our injector installed. Now, if you're installing a new one, they typically come with new seals on it, so you don't have to worry about any of that. If you're taking one out for either cleaning like we did, or one comes out, say when you pull the fuel rail out, then you're going to want to make sure you reseal them. Now, when we go to install our injector, we want to make sure that the port for the injector is as clean as we possibly can. Maybe shop vac out any dirt or grime or yuck. Make sure the well is clean. Then all we do is we take our injector, we go right into the port. On these, you have a little notch where the connector is that lines up with a hole in the cylinder head. So we want to make sure we line those up and just gently push it into place. And that should fit in just like that. We'll go ahead and put our little cage on. Let's go ahead and get our fuel rail put back on. We need to pay extra close attention. Check this out. One of the fuel injector seals actually stayed inside the fuel rail. We will be able to get this on with 2 seals on it, but it's going to leak fuel. Actually, we had 2 that stayed behind. We need to get those out of there. All we need for that is a pick. Be careful, plop that seal on out. Go ahead and do the other one as well. Boop. Double check, triple check, quadruple check, and then check one more time to make sure you don't have any that got left below. Now, unlike our seals for the injector at the cylinder head side, I do like to lube these outer seals. Take a tiny bit of dielectric grease, just go around the injector seal. This will help the fuel rail slide on a little bit easier. I've seen these seals cut or pinched as well. We don't want to end up with any fuel leaks and have to do this job over again. Next, we'll take our fuel rail and go ahead and slide it on. Make sure that it's seated. We got our big long T30s that are going to go in here. Our next few steps of torquing are actually really critical. I am definitely not a torque wrench Nazi, but we do need to make sure with these next few steps for the rail and for the manifold, we get it right. What I do on these is I snug both bolts down. Then I'll take my ratchet and give them a final snug. Next, we torque these to a whopping 9 Newton meters. This is important. We want to make sure we get these right. I usually do about half the torque on one, then half the torque on the other. Then I'll go ahead and torque them all the way. And 9 Newton meters isn't a whole lot. Let's go ahead and get our fuel rail connector installed. Looking back, this might have been easier before we had this all bolted up. Get your injectors all plugged in. Remember, these injector plugs have locks on them, so you want to make sure not only do you get the injector properly plugged in, but you get the little lock locked. Go ahead and do our fuel rail pressure sensor. We'll get our intake runner sensor set in the right spot. These are all going to go over this way when we get our manifold on. Next up, we need to get our hard fuel line that goes from our high pressure fuel pump to our fuel rail put back on. The best time to do this is before you put the intake manifold on. Now, before putting that fuel line on, the repair manual calls for putting a little bit of clean engine oil on the ball and on the threads of each side of this fuel line. So we're just gonna put a tiny bit of clean engine oil on the ball and on the threads on both sides. I like these little oil squirty bottles for jobs like this, but you could easily just use a rag or something like that. We wanna just try and not get a bunch of oil inside the fuel line. Once you get that oiled up, start one side of the fuel line, line up and start the other side of the fuel line. If you tighten one side down all the way, you're gonna have a heck of a time trying to get the other side even lined up. So start both sides first, and then we're gonna go back and tighten them. The torquing procedure for this is a little bit different. you're supposed to torque it to 27 Newton meters, wait 1 minute, and then come back and tighten it to another 27 Newton meters and make sure that it's tight. In order to put a torque wrench on it, you need something like a crowfoot or a specialty torque wrench to do that. Remember, if you use a crow's foot, you need to compensate for that extra distance that we added to our wrench. If you don't have that set up, get it snug, wait a minute or so, and then snug it again just to make sure that it's tight. Also, this coupler piece that goes into the fuel line, if you take that off, which I don't recommend unless you're replacing the fuel rail, you are supposed to replace it. Back when we were doing that fuel rail recall all the time, you know, the recall where the Ewoks actually took all of our old fuel rails, I've seen a couple of those adapter pieces not get torqued properly and ended up coming back leaking. So if you don't have to take that off, don't take it off. If you're just doing an injector, there's no need to take it off. Once you are done with the fuel rail and that hard fuel line, go ahead and make sure you don't have any standing fuel underneath where your fuel rail is. Make sure all of your injectors are plugged in, the wire retaining bracket is properly installed on the rail, and then we can go ahead and move to reinstalling our intake manifold. If you want that step-by-step on reinstalling the intake manifold with proper torque procedure and all of that, be sure to refer back to that video where I walk you step-by-step on how to reinstall everything. Once the car's all the way back together, I like to do a couple of key cycles to build up a little bit of fuel pressure again. You may find that there's a tiny bit of extended crank as we build up enough fuel pressure to actually start the car. That's totally normal. If you replaced a fuel injector because the injector was leaking, you need to do an oil change on your car. What can happen is that excess fuel can actually get into the oil and saturate your oil with fuel. Now, that could be no big deal, or it can cause like really weird system rich issues. You'll get that smell in the oil of gasoline. So make sure if you replaced your fuel injector because it was excessively leaking, you need to make sure you do an oil change on your car. All right, guys, I'm gonna wrap it up there. Questions, comments, drop them down below. If you like this video, please hit that thumbs up button. Make sure you don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And of course, turn on your notifications. Got plenty more Golf R videos coming soon, including, I just ordered a catch can, which I haven't talked to anybody about yet. So that'll probably be one of our next installs, and we'll see if all that carbon buildup is taken care of by a catch can. I have some thoughts. Always interested to hear yours. Drop them down in the comments. With that, I am out. Have an awesome day, guys, and I'll talk to you again next time.